Well, welcome to the New Kind of Man podcast. Today on the podcast, I have Sean Dodge. Sean Dodge is someone who I have been connected with through uh, Instagram, I think originally, and then we've been chatting back and forth. We have a mutual friend, Scott Flansbaum, who was on the podcast a while back. So welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this conversation, and there's some really interesting things about you and your story and really your life of service. But before we give all of that away, I was wondering if you could just tell the listeners who you are and a little bit about your background.
Well, my name's Sean Dodge. I'm a police officer with the city of Modesto here in California. I've been with the Modesto Police Department since 1997 and currently assigned to detectives. So I currently, I'm assigned to SVU, and it sounds so cool until you actually go into it. Things don't get solved overnight like TV. Basically, I specialize more so in child sex crimes, child abuse, stuff like that. And I've been doing that for probably about 13, 12 years, somewhere in that area. It's one of those specialties that I'll tell you, you've got homicide, you've got property crimes, you've got all these other amazing things you can do, but this is kind of my niche. And to be able to sit back with these kids and actually have like a forensic interview with a kid and talk to a kid, it means a lot to me. And then you also live in a society that still has zero tolerance for people that are hurting children. I just feel a lot more fulfillment in the things that I'm doing out there. I feel like I make a difference, I guess you could say.
And how long have you been in law enforcement?
23 years. Actually, this month it will be 23 years. I started out as an explorer, so that's kind of like Boy Scouts, I guess you could say, where the police department went on ride-alongs. My father was actually a police officer with the same agency, so I grew up around that, admiring it, but decided right out of high school that I wanted to be, first of all, a singer, because then I jumped into wanting to be a firefighter because, all good cops wanted to be a firefighter at one time. And eventually, I just kept on getting tugged in that direction. And I'm glad I did. There's just so much diversity in law enforcement. You could work with dogs, you could ride motorcycles, be SWAT team, you could work with kids. I mean, there's a billion things you can do. And that's, I think, mainly why I took on being a police officer, and to be working at the same agency as my father. That's an absolute honor to be over there.
So do you have a family yourself?
Yes. I have, a beautiful wife. I have two daughters from my prior marriage. They live out in Texas. And then I have two sons that are grown and two grandsons at this point from my marriage. 1 3, 1 years old right now. Actually, no, 1 3, almost 3, and 1 years old.
Awesome. So, all right. So you are in the SVU, and you say detective. So the only reference point most people have is Danny on Blue Bloods, as to think that's what a life of a detective's life. So what is that really like on a day-to-day basis? Save the details. I know that you work in very sensitive things, but what is that even? You said it's slow paced, and I don't think that most people have a reference point to even what that looks like day to day.
Well, on patrol, for example, you're going call to call, and I had that opportunity to work patrol for several years. I'm kind of in charge of my own caseload in many ways. I mean, obviously, we're getting our cases. An officer has gone out and done an investigation or the preliminary investigation. At that point, if they haven't made an arrest, and sometimes when there is an arrest, I still follow up and talk to victims. I look at, analysis of DNA, any type of evidentiary type items. I look at that and try putting a case together for the district attorney for prosecution. Then I also try to maintain a relationship with the victim and the victim's family because, there is trust that is involved in this. A lot of these kids that are victims of physical and sexual abuse, a lot of them are a trusted adult, to somebody that they trust and they love, and now they have been betrayed by that trust,
Hmm.
and now I am jumping in there as a complete stranger, hearing something that something horrific that happened to them, and being able to rebuild that trust in maybe law enforcement, maybe just in somebody, and so that's pretty much what I'm doing.
That's an important work, and I'm really appreciative that there are people like you, Sean, who are on the front lines helping kids specifically. I have a really soft place in my heart for kids. I was actually a children's pastor for 5 years prior to coming into the place of ministry that I'm in now. So, and have two kids of my own, very passionate about kids and the next generation, and also the protection of kids. So I'm very passionate about all of those things. And I'm grateful that there's people like you who are going the extra mile to where you're willing to kind of wade through those tough waters that most people can't. They wouldn't be able to, either spiritually or emotionally, they wouldn't be able to handle that kind of burden. And yet to pursue that as the way that you have, but then also to go the extra mile to make sure that these kids are cared for on a personal basis. I commend you for that, sir.
Thank you very much. And like I said, I enjoy every bit of it. I've definitely been blessed in this profession, and I've got a short time left,
Mhm.
but I continue. I plan on continuing something within that realm. I just don't know where God's going to take me at that point. But
Mhm.
there's going to be some other people that need to take my shoes and do better things than I can. So
Mhm. Well, one of the reasons why I was so connected with you for, I don't even know, all these months, and just texting back and forth occasionally, and I think on Facebook as well. One of the reasons why I was compelled to talk with you and really get to know you better is because you're a man of faith like I am. You yourself are a follower of Jesus Christ, as I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And I was just wondering also, I mean, the work that you do is really, really important, really challenging. And what I say to a lot of my friends who are law enforcement officers here is there's definitely a connection between what I do of being a pastor of a local church and then also what you do. We tend to see people on their worst days. And in maybe in the same scenario, I've been at the house where there have been police officers called before, and then also just on their worst day. So I was just wondering, how is your faith, or how does your faith inform your work as a police officer?
how does my faith inform my work? Well, I that's a good question. Didn't even think about that. Well, first of all, there's a lot of I guess you could say people that are involved in my life that help me through this. I connect with a men's group every Sunday morning before church. I've got a good connection with church. I have a good family structure. All that stuff plays into the decisions that I make out there on the streets and with these people. And I think, getting back at your question a little bit, I think a lot of it is just showing Christ's love toward them, not necessarily preaching to these kids, because sometimes that's not going to be the thing that's going to be accepted at that point, but to just show that somebody loves them. I think that builds that bridge. I think that builds that connection with a lot of these families and a lot of these kids when I'm out there talking to them.
Mm. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think so many times that it is that act of kindness, act of service, and just going out of your way. And honestly, what I've said before, Sean, is just people say, "Well, I just don't know what to do," and I said, just love the human being in front of you. Doesn't matter who they are, what their story is, the situation that you're in. I mean, you're doing a difficult work because you may have to put somebody in jail, but yet even out of that, you can. I don't know. It may seem a little twisted. Maybe you could. I think you would probably agree with me, but not that I'm looking for a consensus here. But I think there's some part of this that it's even when justice is inflicted on someone, it is an act of love. You're showing that you love them because hopefully, not that they're incarceration, but hopefully that they will be, there's some redemption they could find, whether if they have to go to jail or prison or whatever. And then hopefully that they can actually be rehabilitated. Is that your perspective
And
as well?
I do. With the suspect, they're human. They made a horrible mistake. It's my job to build that trust with them when I'm talking as well. And I do find that, like a confession, those type of things, if I'm treating them with respect, being civil with those individuals and showing that, what, they made a mistake. that there's human. Everybody makes mistakes. I'm no better than somebody else out there that's making these mistakes too. I'm a sinner. Just they did something that I wouldn't have done, and showing it or throwing it out that way that I make mistakes too. It's just this is a horrible mistake, and to be honest, a lot of individuals that are responsible for these things, they have some hurts.
Yeah.
They have some past hurts, whether it be they're a victim of sexual abuse, physical abuse, or something like that. They need some healing as well for themselves. And so, if I'm able to talk to them about those issues as well, I think that helps. And, my goal is to rehabilitate both of them, I guess, the victim and the suspect in some ways, but that's our judicial system that does everything else and make sure that they're held accountable and that they are getting the help that they need.
Yeah, and it's really a sad state, whenever you see that a child has been victimized by a parent who was most likely victimized, and it kind of changes the lens of which you look at people. Now, I think justice still needs to be done in that situation, and I think it needs to be the full, the full scope of justice, whatever is deserved in that. But I was reminded of a quote from Richard Rohr, and he says, "Pain that doesn't get transformed gets transferred." And that is so much what I've seen in my years of working with men, and also in my work at the church, is that the pain if it doesn't get transformed by the gospel, if that isn't surrendered to God, that more than likely will be transferred to the next generation, or transferred to a friend or the boss or their wife or whatever the case may be. And I'm really glad you have that perspective, because I think that is, I don't know. In my opinion, I think that's a necessary component for a law enforcement officer is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. And then if you put them in cuffs, you put them in cuffs. I mean, that not taking you away from your job for sure. So
yeah, I do truly enjoy what I'm doing here now. I feel like I'm making a difference, and I'll be honest, some of those crimes, the property crimes and stuff like that, my heart's just not truly into that. This, I feel like I'm making a difference. Obviously, I'd handle a property crime if it comes up to it, but my heart's more into this, I guess you could say. And I feel like I'm making a bigger difference there than somebody that's doing property. But there's people that are passionate about that as well.
Well, and that's an important piece too. I think for any man who's listening, what Sean is also talking about is he finds great satisfaction in his purpose in doing what he's doing, which is great. You've been doing it all these years, and just a couple of years from retirement, and not retirement to go sit in an easy chair and do something. Not as busy as you are. You're gonna go do something else that's meaningful. But I think that there's a thing there for all of us. I think it's pursuing good work, good purpose-driven work, no matter what it is. If somebody's a machinist, you work on cars. If whatever you do, you drive a truck, wherever it is you're listening to this podcast right now, listen to what Sean's saying, because he's saying that his path of doing his work is he is finding satisfaction in it. And noticeably, satisfaction in a work that's incredibly difficult, especially in the day and age we're in. I mean, there's still riots right now while this podcast is being recorded. It's August 10th, 2020. This whole year, whether by COVID or because of the tragedy with George Floyd, there's so many things just upside down right now. And your work as a police officer has to be incredibly difficult. How has all of that impacted your work?
It's crazy, and I told somebody too. We're impacted by law enforcement all the way across the country. If something happens all the way in New York or Minneapolis for this reason, we're affected. We're impacted by that, by decisions that are made by law enforcement, or even a law enforcement death. We're impacted by those as well. It's law enforcement. What's very interesting about it is that I can sit down across the table with another officer, say for example Cook County. I have a good friend there that runs with me from time to time. We have the same struggles. We have the same things going on within our community. It's a completely different community in Chicago than it is in Little Old Modesto. But we are dealing with the same issues, the same personalities, the same conflicts with maybe other officers or superiors. And it's very interesting to see. But George Floyd, for example, we were affected by that. We had protests out here. Fortunately, it wasn't nearly as bad as some of the areas. We have a great relationship with our community out in Modesto, and fortunately, it never rose to that level. I think our community has a lot of trust in law enforcement. We've been very engaged with our community as well, whether it be through youth activities, whether it be through just community type activities. We're out there, and we're showing kind of more of a human element, I guess you could say, to law enforcement. We're not robots, and being able to see that and interact with community, I think, makes a huge difference with when something like this happens. We are able to reach out to the community and get the help from them.
Yeah, and I think one of the great examples of what you're talking about, Sean, is 10K with the Cop, of a program that you co-founded, and that you're working with elementary students. And give us an explanation about the genesis of that. And you shared with me a video, and I watched the video, and it's so compelling. But as you tell this, and as you kind of gather your thoughts, I'll just say this: I think it's once I heard that. And kind of saw the video and saw what you were doing, honestly, it just really syncs up with what you just said. Because what you're talking about is having a relationship with the community, and you form relationships, I think, even before, during, and after tragedy. So, and if you can hedge that off as quickly as possible with kids, I think that's an incredible win. So please tell us just briefly what 10K with the Kid is.
Okay, 10K with a Cop.
With the Cop, excuse me.
Oh, no problem. So I guess I need to start off with the fact that I do something a little weird. I run in uniform. So I run marathons in full police gear. That's my duty belt, my boots, bulletproof vest, all that stuff. And I started doing that back in 2016. Started doing that. I saw somebody else doing it, and I thought it was kind of a cool thing. It was probably a pride thing at the beginning. And then I started running and meeting other officers or their families that maybe had died in the line of duty, and start building relationship and realize this is a bigger thing than who I am. Well, a gentleman down south, actually go back, a teacher in our local area had reached out. She had noticed that there were some issues with some of her students at school, that they were afraid of law enforcement. It's more of a high risk area in Modesto. And she saw that I ran in gear. So she reached out to me and said, hey, would you mind coming out with the kids? And I figured, heck, why not? It's good training, and it gives me an opportunity to be out there. So on my days off, I put on a uniform, I go out to the school, and I just start running circles in the playground. A guy in Los Angeles saw what I was doing, both the marathon runs and running with these kids. He goes, what are you doing with this program? I go, well, I'm running with kids. That's it. He goes, why don't you give it a mission? Why don't we do something with this? And I'm not a great thinker at all. He came up with the idea of this 10K with a Cop, and with that, we're out running with the kids, but we're also not only running with kids and having them see us sweat and getting tired, and we're having conversations with these kids. So when I first started, some of these kids didn't want to talk to me at all. But as time goes and you're running, more and more kids started running. They started talking just about equipment. Next thing you know, it's like, hey, you were at my house last night. Like, no, I wasn't in your house. I usually work upstairs in the police department, and I'm a detective now. No, you were at my house. Okay, tell me a little bit about it. And it may not have been a male cop. It may have been a female cop. It could have been, a black, a Hispanic, an Asian cop that was over at their house. However, because of the uniform, I was at their house. And we're able to build some bridges and some understanding as to why the officers did certain things a certain way, and what's going on in the home as well, and why things are the way they are at home. So we started having those conversations and building bridges. Now, the little side thing to that, which was really interesting, is the parents started showing up. So we started building more relationships with these kids where, for example, one of our runs that we had, some guy, gang tattoos all over, came up to me, shook my hand, said, I appreciate everything you're doing for my kid. You're making a difference in my kid's life. And
Wow.
we're building those bridges. On top of that, I call it DARE on steroids. I don't know if you have DARE out there.
Yeah.
I used to be DARE officer for a very short period of time. I believe it's still around, but we teach resiliency to these kids. And the fact that, because running, it's kind of a metaphor in life, I guess you could say. You run up a hill, you're going to get tired, but you're going to have that downhill eventually, and things get easier. And teaching them training and continuing to push themselves, they can achieve goals that they never thought they could achieve. But we talk about superpowers as well. And the fact that, because I'll wear, like on top of my bulletproof vest to hold it all together, one of those real tight wick-away type shirts. On top of it, it's a Superman shirt.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
I flash it to the kids every now and again and stuff like that. And they thought it was cool. And it's like, hey, what superpowers do you have? Well, I play soccer really well, or I'm good at math. Like, exactly. You have something. You can bring that out to the community. You don't have to be what's going on in this community. You can stay in this community, but you can make this community better as well by some of the things that you can do and some of the superpowers that you have. So that's just one of the resiliency lessons. We talk about health and fitness and a bunch of other things with these kids. And this is all through running, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great avenue for it. It sounds like that what you're doing is so well fitted to running because it's the real life example of everything you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly. And like I said, the whole metaphor on life, you're pushing. I think in the video that you saw that PBS had done, I'm talking to one of the kids. It's like, just keep going, just keep going. We're almost there. Just keep going. We're almost there. And being able to have that discussion with them and continue to push them a little bit, not over top, not making them do all the running and I'm standing back and say, run harder. But hey, we're in this together. We're going to get through this together. Push it.
Yeah.
You got this.
So, Sean, where does that come from? I mean, what you're saying is so compelling, and this is really the reason why I wanted us to. We could connect and we could chat back and forth, but this is the reason why I wanted you on the podcast because what you're doing is very rare. What's the source of this? What would drive you to do those types of things? And then also, which we'll touch on in a minute, I know that you're an avid runner and you kind of flew over this, but you run half marathons and marathons and races in honor of fallen law enforcement officers. So where does this come from? Like what happened? Is there something that happened to you that was kind of the genesis to get you thinking and doing this?
Well, my father was a police officer. I grew up at the police department in some sense. I knew other individuals that were police officers before I even realized they were police officers. I never really put it together. In fact, one of the former chiefs, I saw him always working out in the orchard. I never put it together until one day I'm going over to the police department to see my dad, and I see this guy that's the boss that I knew working on the orchard type of thing. But I grew up over there. But I think one of the big draws to being a police officer was the fact that I can do whatever I want. Again, I think I told you this is a very diverse program, and my passion was working with children. So I think I told you I worked with the DARE program for a short period of time. I ran the Police Activities League, so I actually got paid to coach and mentor kids playing soccer, baseball, all that stuff. But I saw that when I first started, and that was kind of the goal, that I wanted to make a relationship. I wanted to make some type of difference to children in the community, and this has kind of grown from that idea that my passion has always been working with kids. I work with another program, not work, but volunteer with a program called Teens Run Modesto, where we train high schoolers to prepare for a marathon and then junior hires to prepare for a half marathon. And we'll meet once a week on Saturdays and then over at their school throughout the week, run with them and kind of talk with them and build a relationship with them as well. So I think really, my wife tells me I should have been a teacher. I've just always had that passion to work with youth and kind of found my niche through running.
I think you are teaching. I think there's so many. I think when it comes to teaching, there's so many different facets and angles of which to teach, and I believe that you are. And you're not prepped for this next question, but it's just kind of off the cuff. And if we're okay with the answer, you can. But if you'd rather bypass it, that's fine too. I just wondered if is there something deeper into your story that would make you have such a heart for kids? Something maybe from your upbringing that kind of shaped you and moved you in this direction? I mean, obviously your dad was a police officer, but was there anything else like deeper in your story that led you to this?
Well, as a kid, I mean, there were so many men in my life that helped build me. It wasn't only just my father. I belonged to something that's similar to Boy Scouts. It was the cadets, where somebody took the time to do woodworking and camping and stuff like that. And as a grown man, his son was part of this program as well. But those individuals in my life taking that time to help build and mold me was what really I think is part of the passion, that I want to do the same thing that they did. And they still, I ran across one of the guys, that cadet leader, probably a couple months ago. I moved back to the same town that he lives in, and I'm running along and goes, "Hey, Sean." Okay, this is 30 years later, pretty much. He recognized who I was, but I recognized him right away as well. And we start talking about his kids and how things are going. And, one thing I kicked myself in the butt for not doing was taking that time to just say, you know what? I appreciate what you did for me when I was a kid. And I didn't do that. I'll tell you, next time I do, I will, because he's part of that reason I do what I do now.
Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. Yeah, and I think there's something special to that too, of just seeing and knowing that men poured into you earlier in your story to get you to the place where you are. And I think honestly, I think that's one of the things that's lost in our culture, is having those mentors early in our life. And I just wonder how many young men um, are just so lacking that right now. And then they end up in a life of crime. They end up into gang life, or they end up in something that they ought not to be into, and then get into trouble, all because people like you or me, because I had a very similar thing. Mine was the Boy Scouts, and where you had men who were, maybe they wouldn't have referred to themselves as mentors, but in hindsight, we sit back and say, yeah, they were mentoring me, at least in this season, about this thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Interesting. So you also talked about the fact that you run marathons. And now I know that, you know, off air, you told me your fastest marathon time, and you said it was just like it was no big deal. But
No, it was a big deal.
well, it came across like, you're being modest, you're like, I ran this time. And I was like, yeah, you ran this time, and it was very fast. So to me, it was very fast anyway. I'm a
Well,
loafer compared to you. So.
well, I guess to start off with, I have this goal that I started back in 2014. I guess before that, before my daughters were born, I weighed probably about 280 pounds. Wasn't taking care of myself. I worked graveyards, so the way you stay awake after about 3 or 4 o'clock at night while you're writing reports is drinking soda and eating hamburgers, and I definitely had my fair share of those. When I first found out my oldest daughter, who will be 18 in February, was coming along, I decided I need to do something, and I need to change who I am. And I ran in high school a little bit, and I knew running. So it's like, okay, well, I'll start running. I can't go out and play football with people, or I can't go play basketball with people, but I can go out there on my own and run and take care of myself. So I started running and fell in love with it. Absolutely fell in love with it. Well, by 2014, I had been running quite a bit. I actually took on the task of running in all 50 states, plus Washington, D.C. being one, so 51 by the age of 50. Now, COVID has kind of messed that up, but it was going to be 5150, which is the code here in California. It'd be crazy. So I figured 51 marathons by the age of 50, I'm going to do it. So 2014, I'm running it. I see a guy, a good friend of mine from Folsom, which is just north of where I live, running the California International Marathon. He was running it in gear. And that started getting the wheels turning a little bit, where I actually reached out to him. I first ran a half marathon the following year with a captain here in Stanislaus County, which is part of Modesto, and then Turlock Police Department, he's a lieutenant now, he was a sergeant at the time. And we decided we're going to do a half marathon. Well, I decided, okay, well, I'll do that, and I'm going to do a full too. So I did my first full marathon in gear. in honor of Deputy Dennis Wallace, who was a friend of mine. He
Mm.
died in line duty. He was ambushed and killed. He was a dare officer with me and sat on the board with me. I'm still really good friends with his brother, who just recently retired and moved to Tennessee.
Hmm.
And still recently, I reach out to him all the time. We talk. However, I decided I'm going to go ahead and do this marathon, see what it's all about. I'm going to run it in honor of Dennis Wallace. And what was cool is his brother Dave came out for that marathon, knowing I was running for Dennis. Ran with a flag the entire time, gave him that flag, obviously gave him a big hug too.
Hmm.
And this was within, I would say, probably a month after Dennis's death. So it was very emotional. And I think that was where it really clicked for me that this isn't ego. That there's something bigger here.
Hmm.
Wherein I continued. It's like, okay, I just did the capital of California. Why don't we do something a little bit different? Let's do the capital of the United States.
Hmm.
Let's do the Marine Corps Marathon in Washington, D.C. My wife, who I'll tell you what, I couldn't do any of this without her. She is supportive as could be. She started getting online with me, started researching people that ran in uniform. Believe it or not, there's people that do Ironmans in gear. And obviously not the swim, but the bicycle and the running, they'll do in gear. And the guy that I talked to about in Chicago, he does Ironmans. And yeah, there's no way.
Wow.
So anyway, we started identifying these people, and we ended up running the Marine Corps Marathon the following year with 12 officers throughout the United States.
Hmm.
Huge, huge deal for us, and we're still all very close to this point. I was texting, Chicago was one of them. Texting them this morning, just checking on how things are going because they took a hit last night. Uh, so these relationships have continued throughout this entire time. I'm at 9 marathons in full gear and one ultra in full gear, which was 45 miles. Now you
Wow.
go back to the fastest time, which was kind of a cool story. I didn't run it in gear. I went to Carlsbad, which is going to be just out of the San Diego area, so it's Southern California.
Hmm.
My wife's family lives out there. We go out to visit family, and I figure, well, we're with family, so why don't I ditch and go for a marathon? Last minute decision. I go out there and run. I run the fastest one I've ever run before. I had been training for Boston prior to that, but I took a couple months off. I figured this is going to give me that opportunity to really humble myself and get ready to go out there and do it. And I ran 3 hours, 16 minutes, and 4 seconds. Now, if you look at that, the fourth book of the Bible, John 3:16, and I've never qualified for Boston other than that one time. And it took my dad pointing it out, but very humbling experience. And to go run Boston, not only in regular clothes, but in police gear, it was a cool experience. It wasn't the best marathon I've ever. It was a good experience, but was it the most memorable marathon? I don't think so. Some of these smaller ones that I've run for families have made a bigger impact on my life.
Hmm.
There's one in Wausau, Wisconsin, small area that we decided just on a whim to go out there and run for a family that we met during Police Week in Washington D.C. So we go out there and we meet with the family of the fallen officer, meet with the captain, and his daughters gave me a letter. And basically on the back of that letter is thank you very much for coming out and thinking of my father and stuff like that. We still have a great relationship with that family and probably the most memorable marathon that I've run. I've also had that opportunity to run a full marathon in Chicago with a fallen wife. We ran the full marathon. It took us some time, but that last probably mile, she breaks down and cries the entire time because not only that, she ran that marathon the year prior with her husband. So he died just after that marathon,
Oh, wow.
ran with us with her brother or with his brother, who was wearing the shirt that he wore during that marathon prior. So
Man.
some of these stories that have come out of just going out there and reaching out to the families have been it's bigger than who I am.
Hmm.
It's huge, and I'm just humbled to be a small part of something as big as it is.
Hmm. What an incredible thing to be a part of. I mean, truly. And whatever your motives were going into it, now it's clear that this is something that you're doing. It's meaningful, and and for me, not being the type of runner, the caliber runner that you are, but from the running that I've done and training that I've done through for a half marathon, I know it does take a lot of time. So it is a commitment for your wife, and I think you rightfully said that too, because she has to be fully on board. Of course, then if you're going to travel all over the country, there's that element, and then the financial piece. But the reason why you run is very, very compelling. And all I can think of is service. It's just a matter of honoring service. What would you say to a man who, not necessarily to mimic what you're doing, because not everybody is a runner, but what would you say to a man to try and help them uh, to to serve others and to honor service as a man?
You know, to honor service, I think it's just humbling yourself, being willing to be real with people is what it comes down to. You can't be fake with any of these people. These people have, like I said, we're dealing with fallen families all over the place that I've had to be very real with these people. We've had hugs, we've had cries. I think that's the biggest thing is you've got to be real with these people, and you have to be humble. You have to be okay being vulnerable with these people as well. With these kids, if I'm not sweating and panting, there's probably going to be a lot less respect for what I'm doing out there with them. When they see me out there actually running and taking it on as well and taking on these challenges, I think it means so much more. So I think it is just jumping in there, doing what you expect of somebody else, doing it with them, holding their hand, being there with them the entire way.
So humbling yourself and just stepping up to serve. Just humble yourself and step up to serve.
And we don't know it all. I don't know it all. I'm the first one to say I don't know everything about running. I don't know everything about life. But being able to say you don't know and being able to learn from those people, nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I totally agree with that too. One of the things I was thinking of also is service is one of the main tenets of A New Kind of Man, and really the whole movement with A New Kind of Man. And it's built off of a scripture, Luke 2:52, and it says that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and in favor with man. So out of that, we have four different pillars. We have an intellectual pillar, a physical strength pillar, a relational pillar, and a spiritual pillar. All four of these, I think, are necessary for a man to step up into the high call in a man's life, and that's to sacrifice and to serve others, and to sacrifice for his wife. So that in accordance with Ephesians 5. So, whenever you talk about service and what you're doing, I think it really goes in line with what we're trying to do in A New Kind of Man, because although I talk about these four pillars, the reason why I talk about these four pillars and trying to help men to have strength or gain mastery in these areas is so that they can serve. Because if they lack humility, or if they're not growing spiritually, then they're going to be prideful, and then they're going to lack humility, and then they're going to stand around and wait for somebody else to serve them instead of stepping up to be served. So that was one of the compelling things that really kind of was brought about through just kind of hearing your story, and then knowing, of course, of the work that I do as A New Kind of Man. I was wondering this too, Sean. I was wondering, what would you say is really the purpose? And it's kind of a big question. We can go a bunch of different directions with this. What would you say is like one of the main purposes of law enforcement in the world today?
I keep people safe. I can honestly say I've never met a law enforcement officer that has some type of a racial or political agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Have I investigated? Have I been or known officers that have made some very bad decisions? Absolutely. We're human. Just like pastors, you have pastors that make bad decisions. You have people that are working at the grocery store that make bad decisions. We're hiring from the human population. We're flawed. We live in a sinful world, and we live in a world that people make mistakes and they do stupid stuff.
Mhm.
Fortunately, I've done stupid stuff in my life. Fortunately, it hasn't affected my career. It
Mhm.
hasn't affected my life, and it hasn't affected my family. But you know, I I honestly have a hard time believing that law enforcement or officers are being hired with some type of an agenda to hurt people. We're there to
Mhm.
help people. In fact, kids are absolutely amazed when I sit there and I talk to the kids and I'll say, okay, how many times do you think I shot somebody? And I'll go, you'll hear 100 times, you'll hear 50 times, about 10 times. And then they're amazed when I say, I haven't shot anybody. I became a police officer to help people, not hurt people, as did many of the law enforcement officers that I know personally.
Mhm.
Uh, it's very rare. Most officers make it throughout their career without getting involved in a shooting. Uh,
Mhm.
but unfortunately, there are some that have, and I'm not saying that their intent when they shot somebody was to hurt somebody. Obviously they want to stop somebody. I've been asked the question of, well, why do they teach officers to shoot to kill? They don't. They don't. They shoot to stop.
Mhm.
That we're not shooting to kill somebody. And in fact, I know officers personally that have walked away from the career because of the mental beating that they took just for doing that. They took somebody's life. They took a husband, a son, a brother, a father.
Mhm.
They took somebody's life,
Mhm.
and they had to walk away from that because it was so tragic on them or so impactful for them as well. So, I hope I can make it the next 3 years without being involved in something. And I think I've kind of upped my opportunity not to, being that I work more so inside at a desk and let the puppies play, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
Um, but there's always that possibility. And I hope to God I never do. I hope to God I never do because that's not what I took this job for. I didn't take the job to get in fights. I didn't get, I mean, there's so many cool things about law enforcement. You don't have to get in fights. Most of the time I get out of fights with just my words. Hey,
Mhm.
let's just talk this over. Let's work through this. We don't have to go to this level. Usually the words are the more powerful thing. The kids also ask, no, I'll talk to them and say, hey, what do you think is the tool that I use the most? And obviously they're going to be pointing at my gun, my radio, stuff like that. No, it's my pen in my mouth.
Mhm.
The way that I choose my words and I write a lot of reports, that's what I do most of the time. It's not going out there and chasing and beating up people. Uh, in fact, I would prefer not to get in a fight because it requires more paperwork and more talking.
I'm sure. Hey, so let me ask you this question. This just kind of rattled out when you're talking. I think that there's an incredible need for emotional intelligence with police officers, an incredible need. And just what you're saying, most situations you can talk your way out of. And I think emotional intelligence goes a long way into this of being able to look at the situation, not only just taking situational awareness, of which you are very much trained for sure, but emotional intelligence to know, hey, this isn't a situation where I need to escalate. I need to de escalate because this individual will de escalate with me if I de escalate. Is there any sort of
Absolutely.
training that you go through law enforcement to train all of you how to do this, or is this something you have to do on your own?
No, we do. Unfortunately, law enforcement doesn't get the amount of training they probably should, and that's sad. That has to do with manpower. That has to do with the lack of officers that we have on the streets. If it was the perfect world, I'd say that officers should be training 20% of the time and 80% of the time doing their job.
Hmm.
That's not real. That's not realistic in the world that we live in, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But we do. We get training on ways to talk to people. There was a a philosophy or an idea many years ago, verbal judo. I don't know if you've heard of that, where you use your words a little bit smarter. You use your tone of voice a lot smarter. If you're talking a little bit more in a passionate or a controlled fashion versus yelling at somebody, you're more likely going to get a more positive response.
Sure.
Obviously, there's going to be that time that you have to yell and
Hmm.
do what you need to do. But I would prefer to just talk my way out of it, and fortunately, I've been able to do that vast majority of my career.
And I think it sounds like that's what it is for most people. It's just, of course, that's not the stuff that makes it on to the news. Unfortunately, that's not the thing that gets shared around and it goes viral. Somebody doing something right. It's the times where people do something wrong or a story gets skewed to where making somebody look like they did something wrong when in fact they haven't. But yeah, so you walk a very dangerous line. You do, and you do it for the safety of the people, and and I know that your faith informs this as well. So, Sean, I just want to say thanks for your life of service, and I want to thank you for going above and beyond and running all these marathons in honor of the fallen heroes and law enforcement officers out there. Such a compelling story, and I think for all of us who are listening to this podcast and just kind of hearing your story, I think we need to really ask ourselves the question, are we really serving in the way that we should or the way that we can? And you are, and I can say that you're serving incredibly well, and your sacrifice is very well noticed, sir.
Thank you very much. It's an honor. And when you reached out to me, it's like, okay, well, you just talked to Chad Hennings, John Elridge, Scott Flansbaum, and Sean Dodge, really?
Yeah.
So absolutely humbling that you would reach out to me and have this discussion. I mean, it means a lot.
Yeah. Well, a new kind of man. I'm not out chasing names. It just the Lord kind of provided those people for me to have conversations with. It's I'm looking at high caliber men to be able to convey principles and practices, everyday practices, into all of us other men, so that we can become new men, and so that we can improve either intellectually, spiritually, physically, or relationally. And you definitely fit the mold of that, sir. So thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been my honor and privilege of having you. And where can people find you?
Well, I've kind of cut social media for a while. I'm taking a social media break, which
Okay.
I would recommend everybody needs to do it every now and again. But you can find, you look up 10K with a cop. We've got 10K with a cop NorCal online, 10kwithacop.org. There's a website that talks about a lot of what we're doing. And they can email me as well, especially those officers that maybe have some interest in doing something like this. At my name, so Dodge, DODGE, with an S at the end, at modestopd.com. And it may take me some time to respond to that, but you know what? I'm not a big thinker. It doesn't take a lot of thought. We provide all the resources and the material that they need. All they got to do is take the time with the kids and be seen. They don't even have to be a runner. They can stand out there and keep time, high five these kids, and encourage them throughout their run. So, I mean, there's no excuses.
Yeah. Great advice. Well, thank you again, Sean. It's been a privilege and an honor. Hopefully some men out there who are in law enforcement will be spurred to action and maybe start these types of things in their own precincts, in their own community, so we can all be better for it.
Thank you very much.